evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Out of the Woods, Enriching Your Maple Business. This is our December session and part of a monthly series geared toward maple syrup producers. This series is made possible by an ACER Access grant to Penn State University, Ohio State University, and Future Generations University. Tonight, we have Aaron Wightman from Cornell University and Arthur Kreuger from Krueger-Norton Sugarhouse talking on the much anticipated topic of sanitation. So I will let Aaron introduce himself further and take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me here tonight. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Make sure I share the right thing. And okay, here we go. So I work at the Cornell Maple Program, which is housed within the Department of the Natural Resources and the Environment at Cornell University. I am the director of the program and also the New York State Maple Specialist. I should say co-director. We recently restructured our program. We have 2 research facilities at Cornell University, maple research facilities. Each features about 7,500 taps. And one is located near Ithaca, New York, and that is the one that I oversee. And our other facility, which is run by my co-director, Adam Wild, is located in Lake Placid. And so everything that we research, we also institute those trials on a large scale basis in our sugar bushes. So I'm just saying that as kind of an extra endorsement of our research, that we aren't just doing our research in a petri dish, we do it on a commercial scale. A lot of these treatments that I'm going to talk about tonight, we've extrapolated those and tried them on the scale of thousands of trees. So these aren't hypothetical research concepts. We've actually tried these in a commercial setting. And so we have that experience to back up the evidence here that I'm going to present tonight. I'd like to start by thanking my sponsors, USDA, NIFA, and Ag and Markets of New York. Without their support, none of this work would be possible, and then they've been great supporters of maple. So I'm going to get right into this so we have time for questions and answers at the end. But the most important concept here when we talk about taphole sanitation or taphole longevity is just the fact that maple trees have freeze-thaw cycles that create a pressure and vacuum cycle. And that's really critical for understanding why taphole sanitation is important. So what does that mean? So that means that when maple trees experience temperatures above freezing and they thaw and the cells inside the tree begin active metabolism and the gases that have accumulated in the tree expand as they heat, the tree actually generates positive pressure. And what you see in this slide is a tree that's tapped with a dual pressure vacuum gauge. So we've used a normal tap and a piece of tubing. We've connected that to this gauge, and you can see at about the 11 o'clock position is the 0 on this gauge, and to the clockwise of that, it's measuring PSI, and counterclockwise to the 0, it's measuring vacuum in inches of mercury. So this is a tree that's in a pressurization cycle, or it would be running if it was tapped. And you can see it's got 25 PSI inside. So that's a tremendous amount of pressure that's being generated inside the tree. And that's what's squeezing the tap out the tap hole during a typical run. Now the flip side of that is that when the temperature drops below freezing, all those gases that are inside of the tree shrink, and that creates a vacuum. And that's what draws more water up into the tree so that during the next pressurization cycle, the sap can flow. And you can see here that during this freeze cycle, this tree has 10 inches of vacuum. That's a pretty good amount of vacuum. And we can see this illustrated even more clearly in this short video that I'm going to share with you. I set up a time-lapse camera, and in the camera frame, there is this thermometer. So the digital display shows the time of day and the top, but in the bottom left-hand corner is the temperature. And above it, although we can't quite see the dial, this is another dual vacuum pressure gauge. So there's 0 at the 12 o'clock position, I believe, on this gauge. So to the left of the 12 o'clock position is vacuum, and to the right is pressure. And what we're going to see when I start playing the video is if you watch the temperature change and then watch this dial up here, you'll see how rapidly and dramatically it changes. So you see the temperature just now going up over freezing, and then the dial just swung really far into the positive pressure range. And so we'll very quickly go through a day here, and you see the pressure does start to ease off a little bit, but you'll see it change quite a lot here as we drop below freezing right now. And there, the tree froze, and it swings back into that vacuum mode. So the important thing to understand from the perspective of a maple producer who uses a tubing system is that this tube that's tapped into the tree, right, it's submerged in the sap. So that's kind of simulating your lines being full of sap. And what I was trying to capture here with this blue dye was that when the tree freezes, you'll see that it actually sucks the sap back up through the drop line, back towards the tap hole, right? So that vacuum effect can draw sap back out of the collection system and into the tree. And here you see, again, we're going through another pressure cycle, and that gauge swung way over. And when it freezes again at the end of this cycle, you can imagine that this sap that now is contaminated with bacteria and yeast because it's been exposed to the environment can get sucked back up through the tubing and into the tap hole. So that's just a really straightforward illustration of the implications of a pressure and vacuum cycle in a tubing system, right? And it's kind of fun to watch. So when we talk about tap hole sanitation, what we're talking about are methods to prevent those microbes, so yeast and bacteria, from finding their way back through the tubing and into the tap hole. And we're trying to prevent that because that's what causes tap holes to stop being productive. So late in the season, when they're still, in late March or early April, typically a tap hole will start being less productive. And that's not because the tree isn't capable of producing more sap. It's just that the tap hole is slowly being contaminated with bacteria and yeast, and those multiply and they block the vascular tissue so that it can no longer push sap out through the hole. So tap hole sanitation means methods of blocking that contamination. So that includes mechanical methods, antimicrobial treatments, other sanitation of the tubing, and it can also just include replacing tubing. And I'd like to point out that this term tap hole sanitation sort of took hold to describe this line of research, but what we're really talking about is tap hole longevity. We're trying to keep tap holes productive for the longest amount of time possible because that's what's going to give us the most sap at the end of the season. So when we look at these different methods of improving tap hole longevity, how do we research that? Well, this is our basic approach that we've been using at Cornell for almost 20 years now. And the way we set this up is with two controls. So two things that we're going to compare our experimental treatments against. And the first control is that we use old tubing, old drop lines, which is the line that connects the spout to the tee, and old spouts with no treatment. So it's a system, or it's a piece of lateral line that's been in the woods for multiple years. And for the purposes of our research, it's usually at least 5 years old. And the control at the other end, so that the old tubing would represent like the worst case scenario, right? And our other control, representing the best case scenario, or the system that should produce the most sap, is an all new tubing system, all new tubing, drops, and spouts. So it shouldn't be contaminated with any residual bacterial or yeast load. And then we have our experimental treatments, where we use different taphole sanitation methods, and those are tapped at the exact same time as the control trials. And these are replicated trials because for each treatment, we have 4 trees per line, and we do each treatment 4 times. So we'll have 16 trees per experimental treatment. And we do the same thing with the controls. We have 16 trees for each control split amongst 4 lateral lines. And having that number of trees kind of averages out the variability that you get from the differences between individual trees. And what we do is we attach those lateral lines to these canisters. So this is all a vacuum collection system in our forest, and this is a picture of one of our research areas. And each experimental treatment has the sap directed to one of these research canisters. So we can isolate the sap production from that treatment. And then every time the sap runs, we come out into the woods and we measure the sap volume in these containers. And so that can give us kind of a running average over time, and it gives us our data set that we use to compare the performance of these different experimental treatments. And something to keep in mind right at the start here is that we're looking at both 5/16 and 3/16 inch tubing, and that they have very different properties. 5/16 tubing has been around since the 1950s, and we've been looking at it pretty closely for at least 20 or 30 years now. And we have a lot of data on it, and we have a pretty good idea of what works as far as sanitation treatments at this point. And a lot of that is data that I'm going to show you tonight. But 3/16 tubing has only been around for about a decade. We don't know as much about it. We just recently come to understand some of its shortcomings. And so that's a work in progress. And the most important variable at play here is sap suckback. So that's referring to sap being pulled back during that vacuum cycle into the taphole and back into the tree, where it can contaminate the taphole and cause it to dry up. So in 5/16 tubing, just due to the volume or the size of the amount of sap it can hold due to its larger diameter, when trees go into a vacuum state, they typically can only pull sap backwards about 12 inches before they freeze for the night. So if your drop lines are 30 inches long, which is kind of an average drop line length, then the only part you have to worry about sanitation in is that drop line and the spout, because sap isn't going to get pulled back from the lateral lines. It can't move that far in 5/16 tubing. So that last little bit of tubing between the T and also including the spout is the zone that you have to worry about for sanitation. 3/16 is very different. The volume is smaller. The sap is in a solid column. It's held together by cohesion. And those different attributes allow it to be pulled back quite a bit further. We've seen it at least 12 feet. We think we saw an instance where the sap was actually pulled back over 40 feet in a line. And the implication of that is that just treating the drop line or the spout is not adequate to prevent bacterial and yeast contamination from reaching the taphole. So that's an important point. So I mentioned that we know a lot about 5/16 tubing, and just wanted to go over some data from those tests over time. And this very first slide on 5/16 shows just new spouts and drops versus old spouts and drops. So what that means is, the baseline for this, or the control, was an old system. It was just a lateral line system where at the end of the season, the trees were untapped. And then the next season, those exact same taps and drops were used, and the trees were just retapped with that old dirty tubing. And then as a comparison, a brand new tubing system, or an old tubing system with brand new spouts and drops was compared to it. I misspoke when I said an all new tubing system. It was actually just the spout and the drop line that was replaced in these experiments. And just by replacing that last 30 inches of tubing and putting in a new spout, you can see that over time at the bottom, there was an 82% increase on average in the amount of sap per tap. So 13 more gallons on average over the years. And you can see that for both gravity systems and vacuum systems, that holds true. And that in 2010, there was as much as 151% increase in sap yield just by replacing that spout and drop. So that's a good indicator of how critical it is to prevent that microbial load from getting pulled back into the tap hole. But maybe we don't want to replace our spouts and drops every year, right? That's a wasteful practice, and it's also time consuming. So what are some other ways that we can prevent that bacteria from reaching the tap hole? Well, there are a lot of different treatments that we can utilize. And one of them is bleach. So bleach is a tried and true sanitizer. For the purposes of these tests, the spout and the drop line were sanitized at a rate of 200 parts per million, which is 1 tablespoon per gallon, for 20 minutes of contact time. And then they were rinsed and dried and returned to the field. And as you can see at the bottom, that on average, that's been a 72% increase in yield over non-sanitized old spouts and drops. So we've learned that bleaching is really effective. And we've got more data than that small data set I showed you. We've actually continued that research through the present and found that trend holds true. Just about every year, bleach is one of our best performers. And the way that translates into a practical field approach is that typically you want to put a quick connect in the drop line. And so it's fairly easy to go out through the woods and disconnect these and put some type of a plug on that quick connect. Take the spouts and drops back to your workshop or wherever you have a good workspace. And you need to not only submerge them in bleach, but move them around a bit to make sure the bleach flows through the drop line, that there's good contact with all the surfaces. And then the same is true for the rinse afterward. It has to be thoroughly drained and thoroughly rinsed. And there are a lot of different clever ways that people have come up with to make sure that they get good contact time of the bleach throughout their drop line. There's some circulator, like rotating drums that people have constructed where they strap the drops to the drum and it rotates and it repeatedly dips the drop lines in the bleach. But in any case, it may sound like a lot of work, but this is a fairly practical approach that some large producers even use. There's a 20,000 tap operation in Western New York that takes all of their spouts and drops out of the woods every year and sanitizes them. So it's very feasible and it is cost effective. Another option are check valves, right? So this is a check valve spout in the bottom right-hand corner, and it's just a small rubber ball that acts as the valve. So when the tree is flowing, the ball can flow out or get pushed out and allow the sap out of the tap. And during the vacuum cycle, it gets pulled back against the aperture here, the opening in the spout, and it blocks the sap from going back into the tree. And as you can see, they're pretty effective. They, on average, give about a 72% increase, pretty equivalent to bleach over time in our tests. The caveat is that they're typically only good for a year, so they need to be replaced every year. So it's not a maintenance-free method over time. Each season, most people that use check valves install the new ones when they tap. So either they cut their old valves off when they untap the trees, or they cut them off when they're retapping their trees and insert the new spout and drive it into the tree. But again, that's not hugely onerous, and it's fairly easy to do in the field. Peroxide is another treatment that's been tried, and this is one that hasn't proven very effective. And one of the reasons for that is that peroxide is an oxidative sanitizer, so it requires oxygen because peroxide is basically an unstable solution. It's H2O2. It's trying to lose that extra H. And so if it's not exposed to the air, it's not really effective. And so that's not been a useful sanitizing solution. I see that there are some maybe comments or questions popping up in the chat box, and we're going to save those to the end. So feel free to post your questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentations. Another recent innovation that's proven to be somewhat effective are these silver spouts, they're called, or zap back or back zap. I can never remember which it is. But the basic idea is the same as what's used in medical tubing or IV tubing. So there's ionic silver embedded in this plastic, and that serves as a sanitizer. So it kills bacteria and yeast that pass through the spout. And we have somewhat mixed results on these. They seem to lose their efficacy over about 3 seasons. There's questions about whether or not maybe they could be refreshed if they were bleached, but that's almost pointless because that's the same as just putting in a new spout. But there seems to be some benefit, but it just diminishes over time. And probably the most clear summary I could draw is that they're really good in year 1 and 2, and by year 3 you're getting something in like a 20 or 30% benefit from those, according to our experiments. And the experiments that have been done at our Lake Placid facility show less benefit than that. So we do all these tests every year. We've been doing them for over 10 years at the Arnot Forest, just different variations. And this is just an example of last year of our results. And you can see that we get pretty consistent results over time. We did bleach again, and we got a 63% advantage in bleach in this case for this past season. We're also doing some retapping experiments now, and that's what you're seeing show up here. Yeah, so this is what our results typically look like. And this would be, so all new 5/16 system. This would be a control right here. And you can see that our old system is the other control, and that our 2 treatments that we installed in this case were both almost as good as an all new system. And then our retap trial here at the top, we exceeded the other systems in production. So this is kind of a tangent because it doesn't really have to do with taphole sanitation, but we have been doing some experiments where we put in a new tap. So we aren't sanitizing the tubing, we're kind of cheating, we're creating a whole new taphole. And in this case, we were trying to put the new taphole directly above the old taphole with the theory that the amount of partitioned wood that we created, it would all be in the same column. So if we pattern tap our trees at the Arnot Forest, so we work our way very sequentially around the tree. We always go over 2 inches, then up or down 8 to 10 inches with our new tap holes every season. So we're slowly working around the circumference of the tree. And the theory here was that if we only created one stain column or one zone of partitioned wood by putting the new tap directly over the old one, that we wouldn't cheat ourselves out of any more tappable surface by the time we get all the way around the tree back to this spot. But what the research in Vermont right now is showing is that maybe trees are smarter than us. And when we try to outsmart them this way, they actually make a new stain column of partition wood that shoots around the one from the original tap. So instead of one elongated zone of partition wood, they actually make one zone here, and then the new tap creates its own that kind of dog legs around the other one and creates its whole new, its own new partition zone. So we're too early in this research to recommend that as a way to kind of get around the tap hole sanitation issue, but it's something we're continuing to test. We actually tapped trees in October this year, and we're going to retap them multiple times and keep them productive all the way through May and see what the maximum amount of sap is we can extract during the total dormant season. But that's an interesting line of research that both the University of Vermont and Cornell are pursuing right now to better understand that more extreme version of tapping and what the implications are. So now on to 3/16 tubing. we don't have as much history with these, but I'll walk through our timeline with that. So keeping in mind the fact that we need to do something more than just treat the drop line and the spout because of this 12 feet of pullback, we looked at these as our initial strategies. And the first one was we tried to use a 5/16 drop line to connect to the 3/16 lateral line. So we would still get the natural vacuum benefits of 3/16 tubing, but because we would add a little bit of volume or pipe volume, I guess you could call it, with that 5/16 drop, then the sap wouldn't suck back quite as far into the tree. We'd only get that 12 inches of suck back at the drop line instead. And we thought that might be an adequate treatment to prevent taphole closure early in the season. We tried silver spouts, and we tried different combinations of check valves that were both inline, so check valves that we actually put in the tubing, and check valve spouts. And we went through our first year of research, and let's see, where's the controls? So the controls here are the all new 3/16 down here is the what we're comparing against. And then our old tubing that was 2 years old gave us the 23.8 gallons per tap. And you can see that all of our treatments were fairly good. The inline check valves didn't work all that great. And this check valve didn't perform all that well. But really, 3/16 starts having performance issues in its second and third year, especially. So this first year of tests with a lot of new fittings and new pieces of tubing wasn't going to show up a lot of good results. So this is kind of where we started. And the real telling results would happen the next season. So in 2018, we looked at our results and we saw that in the second year of these treatments, that none of them performed well. So our all new system, what we're trying to achieve, or we're trying to get to the same level of production if we can with this new system, we fell way short of that, right? We were not even close to what we were hoping to achieve. So none of these treatments were effective. So we had to go back to the drawing board and come up with a new set of treatments. But something happened in the 2019 season, and it was kind of a lucky set of circumstances, as it turned out. And that's that we had to do a thinning experiment in our sugar bush. And in the process of doing that, we cut down some of the trees we had used for those past treatments from 2018. So we had to relocate a lot of our lines into new areas of the sugar bush. And to make those old pieces of tubing match up to a new set of trees, we had to cut new tees into the lines. And I'll just skip ahead here. One slide is to show that. So we would have what we discovered very quickly as we started examining our results, our running totals through the season, is that, for instance, if we go over to the far left, that this was the same experimental treatment that in the lines where we had left them where they used to be. So we didn't cut new tees or cut any new fittings into the lines because we didn't have to move them. Their production here in the red was much lower than the lines where we had to move them, right? So everything that actually they got relocated and had new tees or new fittings cut into it performed way better than the ones that had old fittings in them. And that was a really strong indicator to us that there's a bigger problem, that before we even look at any of these taphole sanitation treatments, that we're having a problem with our tees clogging. So just to cut back here a few slides, what we discovered was that clogged tees are the big story of why 3/16 tubing, after it's 2 or 3 years old, starts really underperforming 5/16 tubing. So that's a whole different problem, right, than trying to figure out taphole sanitation. We're looking at an actual physical clogging of the fitting. So now here's just another illustration of new tees versus old tees, the difference, the disparity in the data. As you can see here, as you go down the column, the new tees with just new spouts actually got 41.5 gallons per tap versus 23.7. So these had the same taphole sanitation treatment, but the tees created this huge difference. It was almost 50% difference in performance. So how do we attack this issue? Because we can't really look at taphole sanitation until we figure out the clogged tea issue. So these are the new strategies that we tried. And we just had our first year with these treatments last season. And we tried antimicrobial 3/16 teas. So these are 3/16 teas that have an embedded ionic silver. We tried 1/4-inch teas. We tried 1/4-inch antimicrobial teas. We tried 1/4-inch teas that convert to a 5/16 drop line. And we also tried sanitizing with calcium bleach at 200 parts per million. So what do these fittings look like? These are fittings that I was able to buy from various sources on the internet. The 3/16 antimicrobial tea was purchased from a medical supply company. These 1/4-inch antimicrobials and all these other fittings were bought from USA or US Plastics, which is an online plastics dealer, and they sell a tremendous variety of different fittings. So I was able to easily buy all these online. Now, the reason why I was so interested in 1/4-inch fittings is that with some coaxing, you can make them fit in 3/16 tubing. And in this case, what we ended up doing was we created a little expander. So it was just a little bullet-shaped piece of metal that we squeezed into the tubing with our two-handed tool to expand the opening after we cut it, and put a little water on these larger fittings to lubricate them a little bit, and they slid in, not super easily, but they did fit. And the reason, as I said, the reason I wanted to try 1/4-inch is because even though there's not a big difference between 3/16 and 1/4-inch, it's just 1/16 of an inch diameter, it actually doubles the aperture of the opening. So you have the opening is twice as big in 1/4-inch as it is in 3/16 inch. And I thought with that extra opening, we might be able to prevent the clogging issue. So that's what it looks like in the woods. This is one of these, it's actually a 3/8 fitting, but I was able to get that onto some 5/16 tubing. And this is 1/4-inch squeezed into 3/16 tubing, right? So that's what it looks like in the woods. And it did take quite a bit of effort. So what did our results look like in the first year? Well, most of them performed fairly well. Most of these 1/4-inch teas and antimicrobial teas, none of them were quite up to all new tubing, except for the 1/4-inch silver tea with a 5/16 drop line. So these are somewhat interesting results. They show a little bit of promise, but really the real test is coming up in year 2. Once these have been out there for a season, they've got a little bit of biofilm building up on them. So the real test will be to see how well they perform in the upcoming season. So that's just another representation of how they performed. And it's not really important to go through all these numbers except to see that they mostly performed pretty well. None of them brought it quite up to the level of all new tubing, except for that one that I pointed out earlier. So this is more of a to be continued. This is the research that I'm going to pursue further next year. But there were some noteworthy lessons that we already learned from this research in year 1. And first of all, the 3/16 antimicrobial teas that I was able to buy are not durable. They're meant for medical use. They're meant to be used in an indoor controlled setting. And so they weren't super durable. And they required some careful installation. And I don't know if they'll hold up over multiple seasons. Now for the 1/4-inch teas, they're just really difficult to install. They required extra effort. It was really easier when there are 2 people in the woods, which is something you don't always have when you're working in your sugar bush. Some of them did pop apart. So with the more rigid tubing, they didn't hold together, and they did seem to leak in some instances. So I typically, in the section of woods, I put a lot of these out in large numbers, and I have a 1,000 tap experimental 3/16 sugar bush, and I put out about 300, I think, of each of these different types of teas in those woods, just to see what it was like to work with them on a large scale. And my vacuum is typically 26 inches in those woods, but it was running closer to 21 or 22 a lot of the time. And I attributed a lot of that to little micro leaks, just because those different teas didn't fit quite so well in that size tubing. And lastly, the bleach, and if I can just go back to this result, let's see. So we use calcium bleach at 200 parts per million, and we use calcium because it doesn't attract rodents as much as the sodium bleach. And we put that in at 200 parts per million. We pumped it into the line using a backpack sprayer, and we left it for about a week and then drained it out. And it worked pretty well, but I was a little disappointed that it didn't restore those lines right up to the same level of productivity as all new 3/16. So that was an interesting result to me for the calcium bleach. So based on what I found last year, I'm going to continue these treatments with the antimicrobial teas and the 1/4-inch teas. And I'm going to do a sanitation with calcium bleach at 600 parts per million to see if I can make that more effective. But overall, I don't think we've hit on a winner yet here in my research, except for there's the possibility that this sanitation treatment might work better at a higher level of concentration. But the 1/4-inch teas are really hard to work with, and I'm not sure that's something that's going to end up being a long-term solution. So the summary of everything I've talked about tonight is basically that there are a lot of strategies that work really well for 5/16 tubing, and we still don't know exactly what to do with 3/16 tubing, but we're starting to figure it out. And I think that's what we're going to hear about more in the next talk. So it looks like I run over my allotted time a little bit, so I'm going to leave it there. So hold your questions for the end, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll let Arthur take it from here. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Aaron. We'll pull up Arthur's screen here, and thank you for the questions. We'll be sure to get to those at the end of the session. And here we go, Arthur.
Well, that was very interesting. Aaron, on your big bush, I just have a question. Are you under mechanical vacuum with the 3/16, or are you just using the gravity with 3/16?
I have that all in a mechanical vacuum.
Okay. I was just wondering because I saw the research before. Well, do you want to start with the slides?
Yeah, can you see them?
I can't hear.
Yes, you can. Can you hear me, Arthur? You can see.
I can
Go
see.
ahead.
Yeah, I can see, yes.
Okay.
So a lot of what Aaron said about the tree and the vacuum coming from the tree instead of and pressure coming from the tree at various times has a lot to do with what we're doing here. This is we're not a university experimental sugarbush. We're a working sugarbush, and so we have constraints on us that are different. We started this out by going to 3/16 early. We got a grant in 2013 to switch our whole sugarbush over to gravity type 3/16 tubing. The year earlier, I had some help from Tim Wilmot at Proctor, and he gave me some tubing and set me up, and I was amazed at how well the 3/16 worked, and just really fascinating that you can make it work without the vacuum pump and the releaser and all the problems that entailed. And I think it's just one of the more ingenious ways of getting sap out of a tree. Next slide. So we had to figure out how to do it because they hadn't come up with 3/16 fittings. They had 3/16 tubing. So we had a hard time. We were, again, using stuff from US Plastics. By now, though, the industry makes pretty good fittings, and we're all set. And this just shows us our setup for making drops that year. Next slide. So we're going to dispense tubing in the woods, and we had to figure out what to do. And we were using D&G tubing, which we kind of like, and it fits right well on a little device we made, which was a reel to you can just walk up through the woods, and it will this reel will spin around. Anybody can make one, and it will dispense the tubing. This usually takes two people, one person dispensing and another person giving you some tension. Next slide. This is our sugar house. It's probably like no other. We're quite inventive, but we've been at this. We've been making sap since the 70s, and we built the sugar house in '89, and then added on to it some years later. Next slide. And here's our hot firebox. We like wood. Next. This is what we brought out of the woods after we got rid of our 5/16 tubing. There's a lot of mainline that we don't need anymore. This whole system uses a lot less mainline. Next slide. And here's some more stuff we're getting rid of. We just took it out. And further, next slide. Here we are putting the tubing out in the woods with help from a dog. And this worked pretty well. Next slide. And sometimes we get very, very good results. So this is probably exceptional. On our well-positioned lines, top of the line, we will often get 25. But because of the layout of the bush, there's other lines that we just can't physically get the height, and it'll go down accordingly. Next slide. So here's our setup in the woods. And the first thing you do when you're sanitizing these tubes is you detap the top spout. It helps to put on tags showing the lateral lines and what you're doing. I'd like to stop back a little bit here and start with the differences between the 3/16 and the 5/16 tubing. And one is that they just do have a lot smaller diameter. And one of the issues in this is the diameter itself. The 3/16 tubing has since volume is proportional not to the diameter but to the square of the diameter. This 3/16 tubing only has about a third of the volume that a 5/16 tube has. 1,000 feet of 3/16 tubing the volume is only a gallon and a half. So that when as you were shown earlier, when the sap comes back from 3/16 tubing, it comes back further in the line, and it's much more potential for contaminating the sap hole. But the other issue with 3/16 tubing is clogging. And as the season goes on and the bacteria grows in sap, and there's many, many different types of bacteria in the sap, and the sap is ideal, and as the temperature is warm, it becomes even more ideal. And they will clog. Sometimes they'll clog the tea, sometimes they'll clog the whole tube. And if you get just even a little speck of bacteria partially clogging a tea, you'll have a decline in vacuum. For some reason, everything's perfect on the line. You know the line should read 25, and it's reading 10, and you go chasing and trying to find out where the problem is. You'll you'll never find it. So you've got to deal with the bacteria that will grow stuff in the line. It'll just form clumps of matter that will get caught. So you have both the sap hole contamination and the clogging being the issue here. And in the 5/16 tubing, as Aaron pointed out, they've done a lot of research and trial and error, and they found out that replacement techniques work pretty well. You can replace this spout and drops, which is quite expensive. You got $1's worth of material there, and it's going to take you about $1.50 worth of labor. So we've got 2,400 taps. Do the math. It's very unexciting to do this. You can try check valves, and they work very well on the 5/16, but they don't work at all on the 3/16 for the other reasons. There's a silver impregnated spouts, the zapback spouts. And except for the silver spouts, we haven't had any of these replacement techniques working on the 3/16. So we were looking around for other means after we ran a few years and found that we were having these troubles. And we looked at the research early on that Steve Childs did at Cornell, and some stuff that Abby Vandenberg did up at Proctor. And it appeared that bleach was an ideal solution. Now, early on in the 70s, most sugar makers in the United States bleached their lines, and we'd use Clorox or the equivalent. And the problem here is that this is sodium hypochlorite. You have sodium and chlorine. And as it breaks down into salt. And squirrels love salt. And there were a few years there where you couldn't keep a spout on a tree. They just really chewed. So you don't want to use, as a bleaching solution, you don't want to use sodium hypochlorite. But calcium hypochlorite is another thing entirely. This is used in swimming pools, and it comes in a solid powder, and it breaks down into lime. Lime has a sort of a bitter taste and doesn't seem to be attractive to squirrels at all. So it's a better solution. Now, it's very important to use food grade material, and the stuff we've been using is called Zap-It. So we both have silver spouts, which are Zapback, and a calcium material called Zap-It. So that shouldn't confuse you too much. The stuff we're using is an equivalent to a food grade material used in the dairy industry called Indochlor. The manufacturer, Actual Chemicals, says that this is just a repackaging of the same material. So it is food grade. So we're all right on it. In Canada, they use isopropyl alcohol. They do a lot of sanitation there. And isopropyl alcohol is not legal in the United States. So even if we could use it, even if it was, I think the chlorine solution is probably superior. We've been using 400 parts per million, and that's just 1 pound. It comes in this Zap-It comes in 1 pound bags. It's available from spadaddy.com and probably other places. And you put 1 pound into 200 gallons of water, and you've got your 400 parts per million solution. So that's what we're doing. Now, the issue here is, can you do this quickly? Can you do it thoroughly? Now, remember, Cornell was taking the spouts out of the woods and bleaching them. And that to me seems pretty difficult. So I thought, well, can we leave them in the woods and bleach them? And there's two ways of obviously applying a solution to the lines. One is from the lower part of the line, and the other is from the upper part by injecting it. And I haven't had really good luck with the little bit of injecting that I've done. I think you could figure out how to do it in a way that works. But the way I do it is to pump up from the bottom. Next slide. So the first thing you have to do when you decide to pump up from the bottom is after the season's done, you're going to have a lot of material in your main lines, and you don't want to push these things up into your lateral lines. It'll just create more problems. So we flush the main lines. Now, our main lines for this system are all vented. And so when they're we have valves at the end of them. So when we flush up, and we flush up with fresh water. I run this from my household water system. I have a spring way up in the woods giving us water for the house, and it gives me about 50 psi of pressure down at the sugar house, and I pump up from the sugar house. And the lateral lines are all much lower in elevation than the ends of the, these main lines are all much lower in elevation than the ends of the lateral lines. So I can quite easily make this, and I just get a lot of water through them and get them cleaned out. Then I close that valve. And then I start pumping it from down below. Next slide, please. So we mix up in this old bulk tank. Bulk tanks are very good sap tanks, and we use this for a sap tank during the year. It's a 600-gallon tank, 24 inches high, put 8 inches of water in it. That's 200 gallons. Add one bag of zap it, and mix it around, and you're ready to pump. Next slide. Here's the pump. The pump I'm using is a Pumpco piston pump. It's a low volume, high head pump. It's used in shallow water systems, like from a spring. And these are made by a company in Canada. This one happens to be a stainless steel variety. And this is also the pump, and it's a very good pump for this, that I use in my sugar house for my filter press. So I have two uses on that pump. It's a pricey pump, but when you figure that how much it would cost you to replace all your drops every year, it's not that pricey. So this is a setup. Now, it's very important not to go over 100 psi with these pumps. And when you start forcing these things up your main lines and then up your laterals, if you don't have enough lateral open, or you're too high in the bush, that pressure will go up. So in your techniques of doing this, you have to have a way of bypassing the extra solution and putting it back into your holding tank. So you don't go above 100 psi. At 100 psi, you'll start to blow seals in the pump. Now, one advantage of this particular pump is it's very easy to rebuild, and I do keep a seal kit on hand so I can replace it if I need to, but I'd rather not. Next slide, please. It's very helpful when you're doing this to have a map of your sugar bush. This is an earlier rendition of our maps. We did it on Google Maps using a GPS. But even if you just had a sketch, it would be very helpful. If you have a very small operation, this is not so necessary, but we have 6 different mainline setups, and they intermix, and it's a little hard to figure out. You're setting a crew up there. It's a little hard to figure this out unless you have a map and you do some marking in the woods. Even if it was just a hand sketch, it would help. You want to do this efficiently. So what we do this in combination with our detapping in the springtime, because we're going to have to go up in the woods and detap. Anyways, we have one person down at the pump, and a crew of 3 up in the woods works best. I have 6 different mainline setups. They run between 300 and 600 taps per mainline. And so I'll be running, my crew up there will be dealing with between 300 and 600 taps at a time. We run approximately 25 spouts on a lateral, so you can do the math. There's a number of laterals to work through. So we want to start them at the top. Remember, we've taken the top spout off first. That's what the first picture we showed you. And so that the sap will be able to freely move all the way up, flushing the lines all the way. And then we move down the line, pulling spouts, and then sealing them off, and going on from there. It's very useful to have walkie-talkies so you can be in contact. Sometimes they don't work that well in the woods, but that helps a lot. Contact is important between the guy down operating the pump and the crew up in the woods. And it's important, you might be dealing with a crew that hasn't been working in your woods before. It's important that you have a walkthrough ahead of time so that people don't get lost and realize what they have to work on. Next slide, please. Here is the Zap It. It comes in these handy little little packages, and it works pretty well. We were a little worried about it at first. It's a material that you don't want to be careless with. And so the first year we did it, we had goggles and gloves and everything. We found out it was not any particular problem to work with. It doesn't seem to even end up bleaching our clothes. You certainly wouldn't want to get it in your eyes, but it works well, and we're very pleased with it. The thing about bleach, you don't want to spill it into a waterway, of course, but if you spill it on the ground, it won't be there very long. It reacts with the organic material in the ground, humus in the soil, and it's gone very, very quickly. So be careful with it, but don't worry too much about it. Next slide, please. You want to know what level you are. So we've got this hydron paper for chlorine. We got this from Forestry Supplies. It's not very expensive. The bleach isn't very expensive. None of the stuff we're using is terribly costly. And this will tell you the level you have. It only goes up to 200, and it's black at 200. And we're using 400. So we're when it's black, we think it's okay. So what you do is you send your crew up in the woods. The fellow will be down there at the pump station, pumping. You'll flush all the lines out. For the higher lines, it might take a half hour for everything to get going. And so when they finally have chlorine in there, you can smell it. but use the test paper. You find out that it's at least 200 parts per million. You're okay. And then you just work up and down the lines, pulling them. Next slide, please. Here's my setup at the bottom ends of the main lines. I can that line with the red handled valve goes into the sugar house. I shut that off, and then I just have the boiler drain that you can see running right up into the main line. And I put a hose, a high pressure hose from my pump, attach it to that valve, open the valve ahead of time, of course, and just pump up. But having everything assembled and having a real simple way to attach things is very important. You want to have this thought out ahead of time, and you want to be able to attach and pump your chlorine up there efficiently and not be wasting a lot of time. Next slide, please. This is something we found very helpful. We got into using the silver spouts this year, and we found out we couldn't seal the silver spouts off on the pegs. They weren't the right size, so we thrashed around and found out that the Canadians made something called a Ster cap. And if you'll, can you have the screen come on to me? I don't, are you seeing me here?
I can see you.
Okay, here's the Ster cap. And this is actually, this is a silver spout on a 5/16 line drop. And this goes right over, and it gives you a little space on the outside. So you're bleaching both the inside and the outside of your spout. So it seals everything off very well. They're very cheap, 18 cents a piece from LaPierre, and other Canadian companies probably have them. You got to pay attention to what our Canadian brothers and sisters come up with. And this is pretty clever. Now, they usually use these with isopropyl alcohol, so they don't worry about taking them off before the season's done. But we're using these with this bleaching solution, which will degrade into a lime solution, and it'll freeze. I tried it. I put this in the freezer and tried to pull them apart. You can't. So you want to go up there at the end of the summer and pull these all off. So you won't have these things frozen on when you're trying to tap out in the spring. You want to keep them on all summer. You want to get all the punch you can out of the lime. You need to have at least a half hour of contact. But if you can get 2 days or a week as the lime solution, as the chlorine solution degrades, why not? And you don't want to leave these things open during the summer, because if you do, you're going to find little mud dauber wasps will make nests in the spouts, and you'll not be happy with that when you try to tap out. So at the end of the season, I pull these off and let these drain. I leave them hanging. I just push the lines up on the tree so that they're hopefully hanging outside the snow, and we're done. Trying to see where I'm at here. Next slide. Okay, that's a Ster cap. Okay. Yeah, this is a Zapback silver spout on 5/16 drops. We tried this on, maybe 600 of our spouts. We had bleach the lines anyways, and then we put these on. We did see a positive coming from this. This is the only replacement technology that I saw a positive from. I thought of replacing everything with this, but you know, a combination of labor and material, it's $250 a spout, and I have 1,700 more spouts to go. I decided that I didn't really want to do that. And I think that by using these Ster caps, I might get to the same place with what I have. And I'm going to try doing that. If I was going to put this thing in from scratch, I might think about going to the silver spouts from scratch with the 5/16 lines. But since this is already established, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me if I can get away with it another way. So we're trying to do some of the same things that they're doing at Cornell, but we're trying to do it in place. We're trying to pump stuff up. We're trying to rinse stuff out. One of the things we'd like to do with any of these sanitation technologies is get the old sap out of there. And by pumping up from the bottom, we're doing that. I hope I've gone over everything here. Are there any questions?
We do have a couple questions. I think we'll direct our questions to you, Art, since you're on here, and then we'll get back to Aaron's questions, if that's all right. Someone just typed in and asked, are you replacing your spouts yearly?
No. I'm not doing it. I haven't found that effective. When I've done it, it hasn't done any good.
Another Kentucky sugar maker is asking, can the Zap It mixture hurt the maple tree if it has contact with the tree at the tap hole?
I have seen no damage. Again, this is a chlorine solution, and we have used chlorine like this back in the 70s. We saw no damage then. So it doesn't seem to be doing any damage to the tree.
Have you ever used any compressed air to help clean out lines?
Yes, we used to clean out lines with water and compressed air. If you had a hard time getting pressure all the way up, if you had a very high Sugarbush, you might try this. We're trying to get complete saturation, so I think this works better. But if I had to, I would go to a mixture of air and the solution. But it has its own problems, because sometimes you get all air and sometimes you get all solution, and then are you sure you got everything cleaned out? So we're running about 200 feet from the that tank you saw to the highest point in the Sugarbush. We can get everything there. It's harder the higher you go, but it does work, and we do push everything through. If you find there's a balance here, because you don't want to have you have all the spouts off at the end of your laterals. You're pumping up, and you want to make sure that you don't have too high a pressure at the pump. You don't want to go more than 100 psi, and yet you want to have flow in each lateral. So sometimes you have to cap off the end of the lateral after you're done to get solution up to the next higher lateral. So you have to play with it a bit. Takes a little time, but not that much.
Is there any lime residue in the line when you tap, or are you flushing it out with clean water at the end?
We would like to flush out everything with clean water. We can do it. We flush out the lower ones with clean water because I can do that actually from my household system. So I flush out the lower spouts, maybe 1/3 of the bush, and the rest I've just left this year, and I will be wasting a little bit of sap at the beginning of the year to clean it out, flushing it that way. But you have to do one or the other. Now, the material you're using, I don't encourage you to get it into your sap that you're boiling, but it's not like from a household bleach. It's not a salt, and it has calcium in it. It's going to be fairly similar to the niter you have in there already. So I'm not terribly worried with it, but I would advise letting some of it to run out enough to clean the lines.
And what kind of production are you getting from your 5-year-old 3/16 system?
Well, this year I got 1/3 of a gallon per tap, which is the state average. Now, production per tap is a little bit misleading because it has to do somewhat with the number of spouts per tap. And as we learn more, the question is how many spouts you should put on a tree. Now, UVM, and I suppose that you're finding the same thing at Cornell, where you have your high vacuum bushes. You might be going to 1 tap per pretty big tree, and you're getting all the sap that the tree will produce. And that second tap hole doesn't do any good. And I suspect that the second tap hole I have in some of the areas where I'm getting the high 25 inch vacuum, I think they're fighting with each other. And I sort of have to rethink what I'm doing here. But this was an old stuff, and this was the best year we've had. We've learned a lot over the years. We've learned a lot about setup, and things work pretty well. Now we have our controls too here, not quite as extensive as Aaron has, but we had a new line we put in, completely new, and we found that it ran longer than the ones that I cleaned out this way. But this is before I had the steri caps and before I was cleaning the outside of the spouts. They did not run longer than the ones with the silver spouts, though. So go figure. So I think we can get a little more. We can get a little more out of this bush at its current setup.
So I have another question. Well, a few more, and then we'll hop over to Aaron's questions. Is there any problem that you know of with leaving the bleach in the lines for several months?
No. Now, I would be sure, because it doesn't stay bleach. It gets sunlight on it, and it's not going to stay bleach for more than a week. Now, in your main lines, on the other hand, mine are black plastic, and they don't get any sunlight, and it will persist all summer. So it's really important to rinse the main lines themselves out at the end of the summer and not leave stuff in them. But as far as I can see, it's not really bleach anymore.
And can you run through the process again really quickly to clarify? When you pump the chlorine solution up to the taps and you've got your guys up in the Sugarbush, so do you keep the pump running and then you go down and cap off those taps? Or...
Yeah, you'll pull it. You can either start at the bottom or the top, the lowest tap on the lateral, or the top tap on the lateral, and you'll you'll just pull it and plug it off using the Ster cap and leave it hanging, and then go on to the next one, pull it.
So all air has escaped at that point.
All air, so you're ending up with a lateral line that's pretty much full of solution.
And do you worry about any residual chlorine on your RO membrane?
I don't have an RO.
Ah, there you go.
But I don't think you'd have any residual chlorine because it degrades, except for the stuff in the main line. Be sure to clean the main lines out.
And you mentioned you're just experimenting with the silver spouts, so you haven't had them for too many years, right?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm encouraged, though, when Aaron says, well, maybe by bleaching them, they will go more years, because we're going to bleach everything from now on in. We really like this method.
I think we've got most of those questions answered. If you can shoot us the name of the make and model of the pump you use to sanitize. Some folks.
Yes, it's Pumpco, and it's a half horse POMPCO. They're up in Victoriaville, Quebec, and it's half horse pump, and I will send you the particulars on it. These you can probably find piston pumps, probably not a stainless one, but a cast iron one used somewhere, because they were used extensively as shallow well pumps, as far as I know.
Okay, and my guess is that with the size of your Sugarbush, you maybe haven't experimented with stainless taps, or have you?
No, I haven't. They're interesting because you can take them out and then heat them up again. I'm just worried about will I get a good feel between them and my lines, and if anybody has experience with them, maybe they're a great idea, but I haven't.
Okay, and do you know anything about Zappit and where it falls in organic operations?
I do not know. I don't know if they have any problems with bleaching the tubing. I do know that they don't seem to like the silver spouts, but they don't seem to care. I don't think they care about bleaching. It's one advantage of cleaning things with bleach is if you can reuse them, you're going to create a lot less plastic waste, and everybody should be concerned with that.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you very much, Arthur. Let's have a few questions for Aaron. Did you see these ones in the Q&A section, Aaron?
I did, and if I could just back up briefly to Seth's question about bleach damaging the maple trees, I just wanted to add to Arthur's answer to be really clear that the trees are untapped at the point where you're using the bleach sanitation. So the bleach solution should never come in contact with the taphole of the tree. So you're doing this after the season. Bleach is a biocide. It reacts with biological material, including the cells in a tree. And if you did get it in the taphole in enough concentration for enough time, it could damage the cells in the tree. But all of this should be done post-season and fully rinsed and never come in contact with the tree. And also I saw the comment on, or the question on stainless steel taps. Part of the question was, could you use bleach to sanitize those? Bleach is corrosive, even to stainless steel, if it's left in contact long enough at a high enough concentration. So that could be a problem if it was left for a long period of time. So I just wanted to jump in and answer those real quick. So did you want to read the other questions, Karen, or do you want me to dive into them?
Sure. Well, we had some, these I think were from earlier. Is the temperature of the bleach water that you use to sanitize important?
Um, it would have an effect. The warmer the temperature, the faster the reaction would be. But that's not something you can easily control in the woods. The method we're using for 3/16 sanitation is also an in-woods treatment, really similar to what Arthur's doing. We're just injecting it with a hand pump individually into individual lateral lines. So we can't really control the temperature so much in that scenario. If we're working to sanitize drops in the sugar house, warm water would work better. But as long as we have enough contact time, it's not extremely critical.
So how would you sanitize a stainless steel spout?
You could boil it. If you could bring it back to the sugar house, you could bleach it, but just be aware that you wouldn't want to leave that bleach solution for a long period of time in contact with the spout, especially if you're using a high concentration of bleach.
But as far as we know, bleach is FDA approved and ZAP-IT?
Yeah, the authorizing regulation for that would be Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, which allows, well, it lists all the acceptable food grade sanitizers, and that includes calcium bleach, sodium bleach, and potassium bleach in an aqueous solution. So all of those are approved by the FDA for use.
Earlier, we had a question, I think it was from Mike Recklin, and I think it was regarding the tees clogging up in your 3/16, the 1/4-inch tees clogging up in the 3/16 line. He was wondering what the slope of those lines were.
Right. So I've seen this, and hello, Mike, by the way. Hope you're well. I've seen clogged tees on really steep slopes with lots of drop, and I've seen them on lateral lines that have less slope. There does seem to be some correlation between slope and clogging. They seem a little less likely to clog if there's good slope, just because I think the vacuum is a little better in those lines, and the flow rate is also a little better. But it doesn't seem to be a real strong correlation. I've untapped lateral lines that have a good 45 feet of drop on really steep slopes after 3 years, and the last few tees in the line are completely clogged. So that doesn't seem to be a strong relationship there, in my experience anyway. I haven't tested that rigorously, but that's just what I've observed in the Sugarbush.
We had a question from Joel Boutin. Does a mechanical releaser create a backflow bigger than 12 inches? This was relating back to when you were talking about the backflow in 3/16 versus 5/16.
Yeah, hi Joel. I haven't tested that either, and I'm not sure. There seem to be a lot of factors at play that determine how much suckback there is. Micro leaks further up the line, how fast, how quickly the woods freeze sometimes, or if you have a big sugar bush, sometimes the lines freeze down close to the vacuum pump, but they don't freeze for a long time further up in the woods, so that gives a longer opportunity for suckback. So I think there are a lot of factors at play there, and it's hard to determine exactly what the relationship is with a mechanical vacuum, or if that's enough of a determining factor to decide how much suckback there is. But Joel, you might know better than me. If you have a better answer, and certainly be interested in hearing it.
Well, we'll do one more quick call for questions. Anybody have anything else? Are there any we missed?
There was one. There was a question on if ZAP-IT is approved for organic operations.
And I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry, I'd have to look that up. I'm not familiar with all the different regulations from each of the organic certifiers. So that's something that I have to check on.
As the last couple of questions come in, if anybody has any left, I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll. This is to just get some feedback on your experience with the webinar. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight as well. It was a really great session, some good practical knowledge. Watch out for our next session, which is going to be January 21st on record keeping with Fred Ahrens. If you're new to the series, you can find old recordings at www.future.edu/maple. I'll put that in the chat box. We did a recent one on climate risks and impacts on maple, which was really great, and the science behind the sweetness of sap flow the month before that. So check those out. Again, they can be found at www.future.edu/maple. And if you're joining us on the webinar and you're registered, you'll automatically be registered for all future series. And so we do have another question that came in. If you're still with us, let's see. Would opening the sap line at the end of the cycle clear the lines temp controlled? We might ask you to clarify on that, Greg.
I think maybe he's referring to just opening the last spout or opening the spouts to get the 3/16 lines to drain completely. And my answer to that would be that 3/16 lines, because they have capillary action between the adhesion and cohesion, they're really hard to drain that way. They tend to hang on to liquids really well. So that wouldn't be enough to totally clear the line of the sanitation solution.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next month. If you need forestry credits, be sure to get us your number.